So I have a long-running conversation with a friend of ours over what the actual state of Richard Dawkins' mind is. And, I think it would be well known to our audience that I'm frustrated by Richard Dawkins because he insists that religions are mind viruses, and my feeling is Richard Dawkins is an excellent evolutionary biologist, and it should be obvious to him that that couldn't possibly explain religions. When I had my interaction with him in 2018 on stage in Chicago, I was hoping that by presenting him with the evidence that he would understand that he had made an error and that he would do the right thing and that he would come around. And
What happened?
It did not happen.
I know.
Right. It did not happen. Yeah. And what's more, he has done quite the opposite. And frankly, look, he's entitled to have personal failings as much as anybody. But I'm saddened and disappointed that somebody who I learned as much from as I learned from Richard Dawkins does not seem to understand the basic principle of scientific mentorship. Right? You produce a next generation that comes to understand things that you didn't. And you should welcome that. You shouldn't fend that off. And in this case, he's holding on to what I think is a childish notion that it's as simple as there's no God in the sky, therefore these people are confused, and that's all there is to it, when in fact, there's a whole lot more to it. And evolutionarily speaking, what there is to it is pretty damn profound. So anyway, I'm disappointed not only in his failure to see it, but in his, I think, petty behavior in failing to see it. And so anyway, I have this debate with a friend of ours as to whether or not he's come around, because he said some things about himself being culturally Christian and the utility of religion and all of that. And then, so I thought maybe he had sort of, he wasn't man enough to admit that he had changed his position, but he's changed it. But no, turns out not true. Here's what he tweeted this morning. He says, "Nothing so vividly illustrates the mental infection that is religion." And he has a picture of the mosque at, this is Mecca, and Muslims all dressed in white, all kneeling towards the rock. And I was just struck that, it's 2025. He knows the argument, or at least should. And here he is still pretending that picture depicts a pathology, which to me is just, it's a preposterous notion. I mean, if you think about, if I was, I considered doing this, collecting some images of actual pathologies. If I put up an image of, gangrene or...
Please don't.
a wart, right?
Also, no.
Right, or a rabid animal or something. They look disordered and deranged. And whatever else you may think about that image, this image, I mean, for one thing, it's a beautiful image, depicting a highly organized behavior of a mysterious origin. That should be beckoning a guy like Dawkins to understand it.
So your idea is that actual pathogen, while organized itself, creates entropy in its host.
Right.
And that religion does the opposite.
Does the opposite. And here's the test. Here's the thing, Richard Dawkins, any day he wants to, can wake up and just run the following thought experiment in order to realize that he's off track. With respect to a creature that is infected, we understand why they don't just free themselves of the infection. Because it's difficult. Because, to be perfectly immune to the infection would be so hobbling that it's a state that cannot evolve. So anyway, we run some risk of infection in order to live life, and that means we're sometimes infected, and it results in disorder. In the case of religious devotion, there are always atheists of every stripe, right? You've got people who are born into Christian homes who don't believe, Jewish homes don't believe, Muslim homes don't believe. If this were a pathology, then the people who were simply like their kin, but free of this pathological belief, they would have an advantage. And that lack of belief would spread, and it would drive out the devout. And it never does.
Nope.
So that should tell you that this highly organized thing that does not look like a pathology probably isn't a pathology, which is an invitation, right? If, Richard Dawkins would never look at the bower produced by a bowerbird and say, oh my God, the animal's got a mental disorder. It's building structures that don't have a value. He would say, that must have a value, given that it's not a nest and it doesn't provide food, and it takes an awful lot of time for these animals to create and maintain, and
the birds that do it do better than the birds who don't.
Right. He would say, well, it's obviously the product of adaptation. He would say, in this case, we know it's a response to sexual selection, not natural selection, because the behavior is different between males and females. But he wouldn't bother with the thought that it was a pathology because it doesn't pass the smell test. And neither does it pass the smell test that Islam or Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism or any of the other long-standing religions are pathologies. It's just nonsense. And it's just sad, he's going to go to his grave believing this absurd thing, when in fact, and here's the irony, the big one at the bottom of this whole thing. What Richard Dawkins does not understand, it's not that he fails to get evolution. He's brilliant with evolution. Until you get off towards humans. When you get near humans, he doesn't get it. Why? Because cultural evolution is playing such a large role. But Richard Dawkins has actually played a vital role in our ability to understand cultural evolution, right? By introducing the rigorous idea of the meme, the analog to the gene in cultural space. He's provided the tool that allows us to understand what these religions are, and he refuses to understand the power of his own idea. It's a ridiculous irony. And there's a part of me that just can't stand it, because I know he's not lacking the brain power to get it. He's not lacking the education. He's got everything he needs to get it, other than the fact that he's stubborn about religion, I think because as a schoolboy, he felt clever realizing that there wasn't actually a guy living on a cloud, and he's never gotten over it. All right. I'm going to get off my soapbox now.